From having little animal mascots in a horror game for younger audiences, to probably never getting a sequel to finish its story, here's everything we know about the live-action Five Nights at Freddy's movie and why it might flop. The story is pretty simple at first, but trust me, it gets very complicated. The movie is based on the horror video game by Scott Games, and it's about a restaurant called Freddy's Fazbear's Pizzeria, where a security guide working a night shift has to keep an eye on the place through security cameras. The pizzeria has a few animal mascots to attract the fictional children, but the thing that had the entire world hooked was the fact that these animatronics come alive at night and give the main protagonist more jump scares than you can count. These are the same jump scares that entertained millions of people who tuned into gameplays by YouTubers like Markiplier and PewDiePie, which gave Five Nights at Freddy's the fame it has right now. A teaser for the horror adaptation was released on YouTube on the 16th of May 2023, which introduced fans to the cast and overall premise of what's to come in the movie. The thumbnail of the video and poster reveal 4 main animatronics from the game: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy the Pirate, who were the ones that terrorized everyone's screens back in the first game in 2014. The other animals weren't seen in the trailer, and I don't think they'll be introduced anytime soon, because since there are more than 9 games in the franchise with different plots and twists along the way, we can expect some characters to pop as the story goes on. The only gripe some people have is how the flashbacks and important parts of the story were either told through voicemail or by an 8-bit cutscene. I get it, it's an indie game, but that doesn't mean you pull an Undertale on fans. In retrospect, it was a genius way to tell a story this big, but translating this to live action might be a big issue. As far as the extensive lore is concerned, a lot of people want this to be a universe of its own, with several sequels to unpack the storyline of the games. Other fans think they'll squeeze an entire franchise in just 90 minutes, since that's the usual runtime of these types of movies. Because of the many kids in the trailer, the teaser gave us the impression of something like this happening though. Those who've played the games know that the only time children are involved in the plot is when Henry Emily and William Afton have been introduced. But there's tons of other characters from the game that we're going to see in the movie. Stepping into the shoes of Alton will be none other than Matthew Lillard, and while I really can't get into any detail about this particular character, if I were you, I'd keep an eye on this grown-up Shaggy. The night guard named Mike Schmidt will be played by none other than Josh Hutcherson, making this his first on-screen role since Future Man and Burn in 2019. The casting for Henry Emily hasn't been teased yet, but I'm sure a full-length trailer will do that job. This might be tricky considering how much they need to fit into the movie, and that's probably why the film might flop too. To put it simply, the whole lore-dumping aspect of the franchise could be its undoing. Video game adaptations have been on a hot streak. The Last of Us and the Super Mario Bros. Movie both paved the way for newer adaptations of fan-favorite games, but Five Nights at Freddy's might be the roadblock that fans aren't hoping to crash into. If this film puts 10 different games in one movie, then chances are it's going to fall harder than Freddy's Jaws in The Bite of '83. There's bound to be crucial plot details that'll be missed out in the movie, and if the runtime does end up being an hour and a half, then cramming around a decade of storytelling in just that much time would be a huge waste of potential. The producers should try to work on what's in hand first, because translating the main premise of the game is going to be almost impossible to execute. Why's that? Well, players just sit and go through the CCTV cameras while switching lights on and off, keeping the remaining power supply in mind. That's it. But how does one make a whole film based on that? For starters, you'll need to get the environment right, along with the maps and rooms. Otherwise, the unsettling atmosphere of the game would be hard to get right. From the teaser, it's clear that the whole movie isn't taking place with Mike cooped up in his tiny security room. That's probably because they'll be explaining backstories and a lot of other poorly planned storylines. Speaking of things that wouldn't work out in live action, the animatronics in the teaser aren't what people were hoping for. To make these things scary, you shouldn't be giving them facial expressions with something as little as eyelids. The last few seconds of the teaser would have been 10 times creepier if the animals had blank eyes, and a little shadow and lighting here and there. The physical aspect of these robo-monsters will be looked after Jim Henson's Creature Shop, a VFX company that specializes in stuff like this. They absolutely kill it with prosthetics and fictional creatures to put on the big screen. But do you really think that this is the way to go for a movie like this? Whatever they plan on improving, they better do it fast. It's not like they've had plenty of time to sort things out, right? Wrong. Because this project has been in development since 2015. Five Nights at Freddy's has had more changes, delays, and directors than The Flash. And that's not an exaggeration. Gil Kenan, director of The Poltergeist, was one of the first people asked to direct this adaptation. But this was just empty news. And there was no development till 2017, where Warner, who first picked up the project, announced that they won't be moving forward with Freddy Fazbear and his furry friends anymore. This is where Blumhouse picked up the leftovers, but struggled just as much. At first, an inexperienced Chris Columbus was hired to sit on the director's chair, but there were more unresolved issues it faced, and was pushed back even further. Fast forward to October 2022, Blumhouse announced that Emma Timmy will be directing the movie. And it's one of the most asked about projects that the production company has ever worked on. That does sound promising, but sometimes you tend to focus on the bad rather than the good. I mean, it's no secret that there have been multiple bad attempts at adapting other horror games, right? Just take a look at Silent Hill 2. That sequel just felt unnecessary. Don't get me started on the Resident Evil movies, because at this point they should just stop trying to make a good one, because it's not happening. The only reason Evil Dead Rise had some hardcore horror fans praising it was probably because of the memeable content that it had, because trust me, it was not received well by the critics. That's the problem with movies of the genre. They just don't work on the big screen. Don't get me wrong. There are probably millions of people who find these entertaining, but they hardly make any money at the box office. After all, those numbers are all that matter to the people who worked on the movie. If it's a flop, you can kiss all the sequels goodbye, along with any potential of a universe. So after all those years, the people working behind the camera can't take any risk with this. Although, despite all the caution, they still took the biggest risk of all. Five Nights at Freddy's will be releasing on the 27th of October 2023, just in time for Halloween, and that might be a make it or break it type of situation. That's because a lot of people would rather go trick-or-treating and stitch up their costumes than pay for a ticket to see this film. On top of that, rumor has it that it'll be on both streaming services and theaters at the same time, so you can already see the low box office numbers on news headlines. I've covered pretty much everything you needed to know about the movie, and as for official plot details, they're almost the same description as the game. The only difference is that they use the word troubled to describe the night guard, which means Mike is going to get some sort of backstory. To all the gamers out there, let's just hope they don't jump to that part of the plot, because that would mean they really are lore dumping, and another part of a potential cinematic franchise won't be happening. And so, from probably never getting a sequel to finish the story, to having little animal mascots in a horror game for younger audiences, this was everything we know about the live-action Five Nights at Freddy's movie and why it might flop.